Hello and welcome to this recording of a coder web training session, part of the ICD-10 Manual Mortality Coding Series funded by the CDC Foundation. This presentation is the first in a two-part series of multiple cause coding instructions taken from ICD-10 Volume 2, Section 4.3. My name is Patricia Wood, and I'll be your instructor for this presentation. I work with the CDC Foundation as an ICD consultant. Although retired now, I worked at Statistics Canada, where I enjoyed a long career gaining extensive expertise using both ICD-9 and ICD-10 for mortality classification. This presentation and others in this series are based on the WHO mortality classification rules and guidelines found in ICD-10 Volume 2. These rules and guidelines have been the subject of numerous updates over the years, and we use the 2016 version, which is readily available at the link on this slide. If, however, you use an older or newer version, please let us know. We'll be able to help you navigate any inconsistencies that may pop up. The material included in today's presentation is taken from Volume 2, with only one supplementary example included. And, as usual, a short coding exercise will be available to help you assess your understanding of the material covered. This slide illustrates the ICD-10 mortality classification process and is included as a refresher in all presentations in the Coder Web Training series. The first pair of boxes remind us that the source document for cause of death coding is the medical certificate of cause of death. To promote comparability of the data produced in the coding process, the WHO recommends a standard format for the certificate. This recommendation can be found in Annex 7.1 in Volume 2, 2016 version. The second pair of boxes recalls that the first step in coding the information provided on a medical certificate of cause of death is to code each entity using ICD-10 Volumes 3, the index, and 1, the tabular list. And the third and final pair of boxes indicates that to accurately and consistently select the underlying cause of death for statistical tabulation, the WHO rules and guidelines for mortality classification, all found in Volume 2, Chapter 4, must be applied. All right, we're ready to begin this session. If you can find your way to Section 4.3 in your copy of ICD-10 Volume 2, we can get started with the material to be covered. In ICD-10 Volume 2, Section 4.3, there is a series of instructions for coding multiple causes of death as listed on this slide. In this presentation, the first three sections will be covered. And if you're familiar with the Coder Web training videos, you will know that the multiple cause coding instructions for malignant neoplasms are covered in 4 separate sessions conducted by my colleague, Dr. Yusuf Hamed. The remaining multiple cause coding topics in Section 4.3 will be covered in a subsequent presentation. Let's begin with an introduction to the concept of multiple cause coding. Reading from the slide, multiple cause coding is essential for a correct application of the ICD-10 instructions for selection and modification of the underlying cause of death. See ICD-10 Volume 2, 2016, Section 4.2, Coding Instructions for Mortality, Selecting the Underlying Cause of Death. It may have been a while since you looked at the very basics of the mortality classification process, but you know that in order to apply the rules for selecting the underlying cause of death, you must first apply an ICD-10 code number to each cause of death reported. This is necessary, for example, to use the international decision tables to determine the selection and/or modification steps applied because all the relationships are represented by ICD-10 code numbers. Looking back at the slide's second bullet, multiple cause coding permits in-depth analysis of causes of death, for example, serious but avoidable complications of certain underlying causes, and the impact of coexisting conditions on the outcome of a disease process. Ideally, for mortality statistics, both underlying cause and multiple causes are tabulated. So besides enabling the mortality classification process, multiple cause coding can enhance mortality data beyond the selection of a single underlying cause of death. Continuing with the introduction. To maximize the opportunity for analysis, as much detail as possible should be retained in the multiple cause coding, such as the position of the individual codes in the data record should reflect where on the certificate the corresponding diagnostic expression was entered by the certifier. Because some analyses may focus on the terminal cause of death or on conditions reported in Part 2. Codes for common conditions or for conditions regarded as symptomatic or less informative should not be deleted or left out, since they may be of special interest in analysis of avoidable complications and may serve as markers of the seriousness of other conditions reported on the certificate. If it's possible to assemble and keep multiple cause codes, it would be ideal to keep as much information about them as possible. This will enhance the research that can be considered using all of the information reported on the medical certificate of cause of death. And to conclude the introduction to multiple cause coding, I'm reading from the slide. Multiple cause data should be stored in two formats. One format that shows as clearly as possible which term the certifier used on the certificate and where on the certificate each term was reported. Also, multiple cause data should be stored in a format that takes the stated or implied relationships between the reported conditions into consideration and where the codes have been harmonized according to the instructions in the ICD volumes. Automated mortality classification systems such as IRIS or MMDS can and do automatically arrange multiple cause codes in each of these two suggested formats. Some manual intervention may be required in other mortality classification systems. This recommendation represents the ideal data storage system, but even a very basic retention of multiple cause codes can be useful in informing the mortality situation in a jurisdiction. Let's look at the first of the multiple cause coding instructions found in Volume 2, Section 4.3. 4.3.2, Uncertain Diagnoses. Reading the instruction on this slide. Ignore expressions indicating doubt as to the certainty of a diagnosis, for example, apparently, presumably, probably, or possibly. A tentative diagnosis, although uncertain, is of better use to mortality statistics than no diagnosis at all. For example, and I will just take a moment to mention that this example is not actually included in Volume 2. It's a supplementary example to make a point about this coding of uncertain diagnoses. So imagine a certificate on line 1A. The certifier has said pneumonia, possibly hypostatic. The instruction says to ignore expressions indicating doubt as to the certainty of a diagnosis. So if we did that and ignored the word possibly, we would read pneumonia, hypostatic. Therefore, for this line of this certificate, we will code hypostatic pneumonia unspecified at J18.2. Of course, we'll see all kinds of variations on this theme of expressions indicating doubt as to the certainty of a diagnosis, but the instruction is simple. Ignore expressions indicating doubt. Go ahead and code as if they weren't there. The example on this slide is actually found deep in the multiple cause coding instructions in Volume 2, Section 4.3.5E, and was included in the second of 4 sessions recorded by Dr. Hamed. It's an application of the instruction we just read to ignore expressions of doubt as to the certainty of diagnoses. Let's have a look. Recall from Section 4.3.5, malignant neoplasms, letter E, primary site unknown. There's an example there, example 32, where it says in Part 1, on line A, secondary carcinoma of liver, on line B, primary site unknown, possibly stomach. The instruction at that part of Volume 2 is, if this certificate mentions a probable or possible site, disregard the expression indicating doubt and code to that site. This is part of the instruction included at primary site unknown in the section of instructions for multiple cause coding for malignant neoplasms. So, following that instruction, we code line B as malignant neoplasm of stomach, C169. So in conclusion, when a certifier expresses doubt as to the certainty of a single cause of death, the expression of doubt is ignored and the cause of death is coded as reported. The remaining instructions we'll cover in today's presentation all center around the use of the expression either or. Reading from the slide, the certifier might report alternative diagnoses as either diagnosis A or diagnosis B. In such cases, proceed as follows. And on this slide and each subsequent slide will be a scenario of a particular type with a coding instruction on how to handle that scenario. So for example, at section 4.3.3a, one condition, either one site or another. Next little section, lowercase a in parentheses, is the instruction. If the sites are in the same anatomical system, code to the residual category for the group or anatomical system in which the reported sites are classified. As an example, which you will also find in Volume 2 in Section 4.3.3AA, a certifier might report on the certificate cancer of kidney or bladder. Here, the certifier is expressing some doubt as to the point of origin of the malignant neoplasm he's reporting. He tells us that it's either in the kidney or the bladder. The instruction at 4.3.3 capital A lowercase a says, when this is the case and the sites are in the same anatomical system, we should code to the residual category of that system for that condition. Here's where it's helpful to apply a provisional code to each cause of death. Let's have a look. Malignant neoplasm of kidney, we would code that to C64. Bladder, we would code that to C67-9. Those codes are provisional to help us sort out how to solve this dilemma of either kidney or bladder. So they're there in parentheses, in italics, to make a point. And the point is that we will realize, okay, the site, kidney and bladder, are in the same anatomical site for malignant neoplasms. We will not code it as cancer of kidney or cancer of bladder. Neither one will code as per the instruction, malignant neoplasm, urinary organ unspecified, C68.9. So to refresh, one condition, malignant neoplasm, either one site or another, either kidney or bladder. If the sites are in the same anatomical system, code to the residual category for the group or anatomical system in which the reported sites are classified. Kidney and bladder are both part of the urinary system. Therefore, we will code to the residual category for that system, malignant neoplasm, urinary organ unspecified, C68.9. We're still considering one condition certified as either one site or another. So we're still at section 4.3.3, uppercase A second scenario, lowercase b. If the reported sites are in different anatomical systems, or if there's no residual category for the group or anatomical system, code to the residual category for the disease or condition specified. Here's another situation where applying a provisional code to each of the sites reported is helpful. When we do that, we see that for malignant neoplasms, the adrenal gland and the kidney are not considered to be part of the same anatomical system. So we see that by making a provisional coding of C74-9 for adrenal gland and C64 for kidney. We realize that the reported sites are in different anatomical systems, and therefore will code to the residual category for the disease or condition specified, which was cancer. So we will code the statement, cancer of adrenal gland or kidney. We will code that as malignant neoplasm, primary site unspecified, C80.9. Another instruction in section 4.3.3, either or, this time at uppercase B, one site or system, either one condition or another condition. Reading from the slide, if the reported conditions are classifiable to different 4-character subcategories of the same 3-character category, code to the 4-character subcategory for unspecified. Here, applying a provisional code makes the instruction easy. Looking at the example 3, which I'll remind you is also in volume 2, part 1, line A, arteriosclerotic heart disease or coronary aneurysm. Arteriosclerotic heart disease is provisionally coded to I251, coronary aneurysm provisionally coded to I254. These two conditions are classifiable to different 4-character subcategories in the same 3-character category, I25. Therefore, following the instruction, we'll code to the 4-character subcategory for unspecified. Chronic ischemic heart disease unspecified, I259. Another scenario for 4.3.3, letter B, one site or system, either one condition or another condition, lowercase b. If the reported conditions are classifiable to different 3-character categories, but ICD-10 provides a residual category for the disease in general, code to the residual category. For example, number 4, Part 1, Line A, myocardial infarction or coronary aneurysm. The provisional code for myocardial infarction is I219, coronary aneurysm, from the last slide, I254. These two conditions are not 4-character subcategories of the same 3-character category. They're in different 3-character categories, but they're in the same block of codes. Therefore, we'll code the expression myocardial infarction or coronary aneurysm. We'll code it to the residual category for ischemic heart diseases. Chronic ischemic heart disease unspecified, I259. The residual category for ischemic heart disease, the block of codes from I20 to I25. One more instruction for a scenario where we have one site or system, either one condition or another condition. If the reported conditions are classifiable to different 3-character categories and there's no residual category for the disease in general, code to the residual category relating to disease of the anatomical site or system. Example 5, Part 1, Line A, tuberculosis or cancer of lung. Even without applying provisional codes, you're already thinking, well, those are not going to be in the same block of codes. And indeed, tuberculosis would be classified to A169, a code found in Chapter 1. Cancer of lung would be coded to C349, a code found in Chapter 2. This last scenario, where either or mentions one site or system, but the conditions reported are not in the same 3-character code or even in the same block of codes, one thing that can be inferred is that the two conditions are of one site or system and can therefore be coded to the residual category relating to the disease of that anatomical site, or as other diseases of lung, J98.4. Continuing, in our examination of instructions on how to resolve situations where the certifier has reported alternative diagnoses, either diagnosis A or diagnosis B. Instruction C, either one condition or another, different anatomical systems. When different diseases or different anatomical systems are reported as either or, code to other specified general symptoms and signs are 68.8. One more example of applying the instruction at 4.3.3b little c. If the reported conditions are classifiable to different 3-character categories and there's no residual category for the disease in general, code to the residual category relating to the disease of the anatomical site or system. Example 6 has on line A, stroke or heart attack. Putting a provisional code on each of those two conditions will demonstrate to us that they are not in the same 3-character category. They're in different ones. They're not in the same block of codes, but we do notice that they're both in diseases of the circulatory system, not a single site, but the circulatory system. Therefore, we will code these as other and unspecified disorders of circulatory system, I99. The next instruction deals with the unlikely situation that the certifier reports either one condition or another of different anatomical sites. On the slide at letter C, either one condition or another, different anatomical sites. When different diseases of different anatomical sites are reported as either or, code to other specified general symptoms and signs R68.8. Example 7, Part 1, Line A, gallbladder colic or coronary thrombosis. Even before applying a provisional code to the two possible causes of death, you're suspicious that they're not similar. Indeed, gallbladder colic would be assigned a code of K802, coronary thrombosis a code of I219. These are not in the same three-character category. They're not in the same block of codes. They're not even in the same chapter of codes. And they are also not in the same anatomical site or system. They are two very different causes of death. And our only choice here is to code this to other specified general symptoms and signs, R68.8. It's fair to say that in such a case, the certifier is reporting that he really doesn't know what the underlying cause of death was. All that he can say is that it was one disease condition or another. And in such a case, the code applied must reflect the statement made. So we would code this as other specified general symptoms and signs, R68.8. In this final scenario, we're at section 4.3.3, either or. Instruction D, either disease or injury. When death is reported as due to either a disease or an injury, code to other ill-defined and unspecified causes of mortality, R99. Looking at example 8, part 1, line A, coronary occlusion with a provisional code of I219, or war injuries with a provisional code of Y369. It's hard to imagine a certifier being unable to make a decision about a death being due to a disease or an external cause, but if it were to happen, you would simply code the cause of death to unknown cause R99. To do otherwise would suggest that you know better than the certifier. We always try to make our coding be the best reflection of the opinion of the certifier. In each of the either or examples, we reduce the certification of two causes of death to one single code. This may strike you as odd in a series of instructions for multiple cause of death coding, but all the either or scenarios presented could be included on certificates with other causes of death reported as well. Having coded the either or statement properly according to the instructions in section 4.3.3, you would then carry on, code any and all other causes of death, and then apply the selection and modification rules to select an underlying cause of death for statistical purposes. In summary, we have examined extensive instructions for coding the rarely occurring certification of an either or statement. We now know what to do if the certifier reports alternative diagnoses as either diagnosis A or diagnosis B. In such cases, we know to proceed as follows. The instruction at letter A, one condition, either one site or another. We have two scenarios to explain to us how to code those. Instruction B, one site or system, either one condition or another. We have three different scenarios to code for there. Instruction at letter C, either one condition or another, different anatomical systems. And the instruction at letter D, either disease or injury, and instruction on how to code that. These are a lot of instructions, but I think you can see that there's a decision stepwise to make. Decide what it is you have in your either this or that statement and apply the appropriate instruction. Happily, the either or statement is not too often included on a certificate, but we certainly know how to manage it when it is. The instructions at 4.3.3 A through D will sort us out for that. Here's the slide that I used at the beginning of the presentation, appearing at the end. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation in section 4.3, there are instructions for coding multiple causes of death. In this presentation, the first three topics have been covered. And again, the malignant neoplasm coding instructions at section 4.3.5 have been covered in a series of 4 sessions conducted by Dr. Hamed. The remaining topics in section 4.3 will be covered in a subsequent presentation. Thank you for your attention, and until we meet again, bye for now.